And now from TreasureIslandOldies.com, here's the rock and roll news for the week of April 14th. In 1968, producer Phil Spector married Ronnie Bennett from the Ronettes, 4 years after beginning an affair with her, and 2 years after he had divorced his first wife. And his father, Harvey, committed suicide this week in 1949. And on his tombstone was written, "To know him is to love him." And that eventually inspired Phil, his son, to write the song for the Teddy Bears with that same name title. The Beatles first met the Rolling Stones after the Stones concert in Richmond, England this week in 1963. Bobby Helms auditioned for and ended up signing with Decca Records this week in 1956. In 1960, the Broadway musical Bye Bye Birdie opened up on Broadway, inspired by the drafting of Elvis Presley. The final Where the Action Is TV show aired this week in 1967. Buffalo Springfield performed for the first time opening for the Byrds in San Bernardino, California this week in 1966. The Dick Clark movie Because They're Young opened this week in 1960. The first U.S. Hollies concert happened in New York City at the Paramount Theater in 1965. The first Queen concert in the U.S. happened in 1974 at Regis College in Denver, Colorado. And in 2008, with more Queen news, Brian May became Chancellor of John Moore University in Liverpool, England. 77 Sunset Strip, the TV show that starred Ed Burns, debuted as an episode of the TV series Conflict this week in 1957. The first Rolling Stones album was released in Britain in 1964. The FBI in Washington, D.C. reported it could not determine the lyrics to Louie Louie in 1964. The first solo concert by the band happened in San Francisco this week in 1969. Them, with Van Morrison, made their concert appearance in Belfast at the Maritime Hotel this week in 1964. The first Paul McCartney solo album took place on the market this week. It was released in 1970, simply called McCartney. Etta James received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2003. American Bandstand aired a taped telephone interview with the Beatles in 1964. The movie FM, with performances by Linda Ronstadt and Jimmy Buffett, debuted this week in 1978. Clyde McPhatter was discharged from the U.S. Army in 1956. Jackie Wilson debuted at the Copacabana in New York City in 1962. The first ever Deep Purple concert took place in Denmark this week in 1968 in Yestrup. The Elvis Presley and Margaret film Viva Las Vegas had its premiere this week in 1964 in New York City and opened nationally 2 months later. And the Elvis Presley and Shelley Fabre movie Girl Happy opened this week in 1965. George Harrison received a posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2009. And also in 2009, Jerry Marsden from Jerry and the Pacemakers received a Freedom of Liverpool Award for his services to charity and his hometown. In the studio, the Beatles recorded Paperback Writer in 1966. Aretha Franklin recorded Think in 1968. Dean Martin recorded Everybody Loves Somebody in 1964. Ricky Nelson cut Poor Little Fool in 1958. Bobby Bare recorded Detroit City in 1963. And the Beatles recorded the vocals for Eleanor Rigby also this week in 1966. Birthdays: Dave Edmunds is 69. Roy Clark is turning 80. Bob Luman, born 1937. Dusty Springfield, born this week, 1939. Bobby Vinton is 78. Roy Hamilton, born 1929. Henry Mancini, born 1924 this week. Jerry Rafferty is born 1947. Ed Townsend, born 1929. Tony Bellis is 77. Bobby Curtola is 69. The producer, Don Kirshner, who brought the Monkees to us, as well as the TV series Rock Concert, he was born this week in 1934. Haley Mills is 67. Mark Volman from the Turtles is 65. Dickie Goodman, born in 1934. Bobby Russell, born in 1941. And Johnny Tillotson is also having a birthday, and he's turning 74. And from TreasureIslandOldies.com, and this is the rock and roll news for the week of April 14th. Thank you for listening. I'm Michael Godin.
Treasure Island Oldies.